In this video, we're going to give you the 5 key principles for writing easy to read, easy to understand sentences. You probably weren't taught these principles in school, but they may be the most powerful techniques you can learn. And these principles work with any scientific material, no matter how complex or how specialized. Already, you've probably read dozens and dozens of scientific papers in all kinds of journals. You know how hard it seems to get through them. Reading them can sometimes feel like trying to run through quicksand. Why are so many science papers hard to read? Because hard-to-read papers sometimes violate the 5 principles we are going to discuss. Here are the 5 principles that will help you improve sentence readability and flow. Sequence old to new, sequence light to heavy, use transitional words, use echo words, and use strong verbs. Now, what do these principles mean? When you sequence old to new in a series of sentences, you connect new concepts with previously introduced concepts. You go from old to new. You don't expose your reader to new concepts in the next sentence until you have related them to older concepts from previous sentences. When you sequence light to heavy, the subject of the sentence is light. That is, not too many words, and the subject is placed very close to the verb, and the verb is close to the beginning of the sentence. All the heavy, detailed information follows. Next, when you use transitional words, you establish the logical relationship between concepts as you move from sentence to sentence. Transition words are the connective tissue linking your sentences. Now, when we say use echo words, we mean keeping your terms and categories consistent. Readers will hear the echo of previously used words and be able to process the information much more efficiently. And finally, use strong verbs. Express action in verbs, not nouns. And yes, you can use the active voice primarily. And you can use active verbs with concepts and ideas, not necessarily with humans or sentient beings. Okay, now let's look at each principle and how it works. Now, when we mean sequence ideas from old to new, we want to begin with old, previously introduced concepts before you expose your reader to any new concepts that are related. Let's take a look at an example. All experiments will be conducted with stromal cells isolated from normal endometrium and disease endometriotic tissue. The tissue will be obtained under informed consent under a protocol approved by the Institutional Review Board. So first we introduce the concept of tissue. Then, that old concept begins the new sentence before we introduce the new concept of informed consent. This is the process of linking old to new. Compare that with this sentence. All experiments will be conducted with stromal cells isolated from normal endometrium and disease endometriotic tissue. Informed consent will be obtained under a protocol approved by the Institutional Review Board to acquire the tissue. Now we've introduced that tissue concept, but we interpose a new concept before we've connected it up with the old. It comes out of nowhere. The old concept occurs at the end. This violation of the old and new principle really makes a sentence extremely difficult to read and process. Now, when we sequence sentences from light to heavy, we try to make sure that the subject of the sentence has as few words as possible. That is, it's light, and the verb is as close as possible to the beginning of the sentence. And then all the detailed, heavy information can follow. Thus, we see in this good example, X-ray crystallography provides 3 benefits, which are benefit 1, benefit 2, and benefit 3. So we have a succinct, light subject, a close-on verb, and all the heavy, detailed information at the end. Compare that to the same sentence that is heavy to light. Benefit 1, benefit 2, and benefit 3 are the 3 benefits of X-ray crystallography. What happens here? It takes us working through each of the benefits before the verb tells us that they are in fact the benefits. We have the heavy stuff first. The verb is too far down, and then all the light information is at the end. We have to slog our way through the sentence to get at the subject of the sentence. Next, our third principle is the trickiest to apply, using transitional words to show relationships. English is a very rich language, and there are many transitional words available that we can use to establish connections between concepts. Over time, as you write more and read more, you will become sensitized to the relationships between conceptual connections you want to establish and the words used to establish that connection. Here are some examples: addition, comparison, contrast, enumeration, illustration, place, result, summary, time. Again, this is a rich set of transitional words, and you'll grow into using them more effectively. Let's look at an example. So let's compare a paragraph with no transitions to one with transitional terms at the beginning of sentences that will help the flow. The no transition paragraph reads, researchers have made great strides in diagnosing Alzheimer's disease early and accurately in recent years. Physicians who examined an older patient who seemed out of touch with reality used to have to guess whether the person was senile or had Alzheimer's. Physicians are able to use new and more reliable tests currently. These tests are not without problems. Now this paragraph lacks transitions, and what are we trying to show? The nature of time, what was occurring in the past, what's happening now, why the current tests have problems. When we have transitions at the beginning of sentences, we can really see that time pattern clearly. In recent years, researchers have made great strides in diagnosing Alzheimer's. Not too long ago, when a physician examined an older patient who seemed out of touch with reality, the physician had to guess. In the past few years, however, physicians have been able to use new and more reliable tests. Nevertheless, these tests raise their own problems. These transition words that establish the time pattern link the concepts together and make the paragraph much easier for a reader to process. The fourth principle is the use of echo words. Echo words, that is, repeating the same words consistently to represent concepts. This helps readers see the logical chain of your sentences. Think of it this way. Each sentence is a contract with a reader. The reader expects each sentence to connect back to the previous sentence and to create the context for the next sentence. As a writer, you must choose words to manage those expectations. Now, you may have heard or have been taught that you need variety in your writing. Use synonyms and different phrases to describe the same things. Well, this is actually bad advice. Use the same terms, the same words consistently. Let's look at an example. First, let's look at the opening two sentences of this paragraph. Histological examination of biological and medical specimens have gained its universality and undisputed significance through distinct staining techniques and microscopical evaluation. Discrimination of tissue types after specific staining and labeling is an essential prerequisite for histopathological investigation, for example, an accurate diagnosis of cancer. So, what's the difference between specimens and tissue? Aren't they really the same thing, since histology is the study of tissue and the cells of that tissue? In that case, let's stick to using the word tissue. Then we have the word labeling. Is that what histologists do, label? Look back to the phrase microscopical evaluation. No, histologists are evaluating and interpreting, determining differences within a tissue sample. Now let's look at the next two sentences, beginning with the word histochemical right here. Histochemical staining techniques can only be used in a targeted manner for known compounds, and only a limited number of such targets can be visualized from a given sample at the same time. Another limitation of classical histology lies in the fact that a considerable amount of experience is required, and that even well-trained pathologists often interpret histologically stained sections differently. Note the phrase, another limitation. That means there must have been a limitation discussed before that. And of course, it is in the sentence before that, but it is not designated as such as in the previous sentence. So we should use that term in the previous sentence. Finally, note all the words to describe what a scientist does when looking at histologically stained tissue. The scientist evaluates, discriminates, visualizes, interprets. Do we need all those words, or can we convey our meaning clearly by selecting the same word for the same process and repeating those words as echo words? Well, we can. So let's look at a revised sample. Histological examination of tissue has gained its universality and undisputed significance through distinct staining techniques and interpretation with microscopical visualization. Discrimination of tissue types after specific staining and visualization is an essential prerequisite for histopathological investigation, for example, an accurate diagnosis of cancer. But histochemical staining techniques have two limitations. First, the techniques can only be used in a targeted manner for known compounds, and only a limited number of such targets can be visualized from a given tissue sample at the same time. Second, interpreting a histochemically stained tissue requires a considerable amount of experience, and even well-trained pathologists often interpret histologically stained sections differently. See how the ideas are knitted together by the use of echo words? Tissue, interpretation, visualization. We see two limitations. First, second, the meaning is still conveyed, but this passage is so much easier to read because the same words are being used for the same ideas. Finally, our fifth principle, using strong verbs to increase clarity. When you write sentences, express actions as verbs. When possible, use active voice. First, identify the actors and note that the actor can be a study, an experiment, a process. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person. Let's look at our before example. In a study of mouse tumor models, previously characterized tumor-penetrating peptide, IRGD, was shown to increase vascular and tissue permeability in a tumor-specific and neuropilin-1-dependent manner. Note that the verb is buried in the middle of the sentence and is passive voice, was shown. Now look at the revision. A study of mouse tumor models showed that previously characterized tumor-penetrating peptide, IRGD, increased vascular and tissue permeability in a tumor-specific and neuropilin-1-dependent manner. Now the study is the actor. It showed results. But what is the most important concept here? The increase in vascular and tissue permeability. So let's do another version. According to a study of mouse tumor models, previously characterized tumor-penetrating peptide, IRGD, increased vascular and tissue permeability in a tumor-specific and neuropilin-dependent manner. So now look at the after to version. Now, increased is the main verb of the sentence, and rightly so, because that increase is the most important point of the sentence. Applying these 5 concepts will improve every sentence you write. Sequence old to new. Make sure you sequence with old previously introduced concepts before you expose your reader to new concepts that are related. Sequence light to heavy. Use a subject sentence that is light, with the verb following close on and all the heavy information afterwards. Employ transitional words that establish logical relationships between your sentences. Keep your terms and categories consistent with echo words, so readers hear that echo throughout the reading process. And finally, express your action in verbs, not nouns, and rely primarily on the active voice. If you follow these 5 principles, you will write clear, easy to read sentences no matter how complex the scientific information.